So the customer first process. About 2.5 years ago, I get a call from not directly from our chief marketing officer, but someone who works for her. I think it was 2 days before Christmas, and we have a week shutdown between Christmas and New Year's. And they say, you have to be in San Jose, and I live in Boston, you have to be in San Jose the day after shutdown is over. So I have to do this last-minute travel planning. I don't know what it's about. I get there. I know a little bit about what it's about, but not all of it. There's about 20 people from different marketing functions around the world. There's global marketing, field marketing, the folks who did Cisco.com, our communications department. And we got stuck in what became a hot and stinky conference room for 3 days thinking about how we reinvent marketing, because our CMO came to the conclusion that customers were buying differently, right? And for us this was a kind of a new thing, because we had been like many large B2B companies. We focused on product marketing, our business units, and each business unit would market to customers on their own. And to be fair, they thought about the customer and they understood the customer, but only from the very specific lens of their product. So what happened was you would have 10 marketing programs hitting the same CIO or network buyer or someone that were different, they looked different, they felt different, they said different things, and sometimes they said conflicting things. So we came up, this group of about 20 people, with a proposal for our executive leadership team regarding how we actually organize and run marketing differently. And a big part of that was putting the customer at the center. So we came up with a mantra that we still debate exactly what it was, but it was something like customer first, country led, and digital centric. And the idea was to move a lot of the marketing function out closer to the customer in our larger countries and in our regions, and then to have the global team and the product teams be more of a support structure. And that caused, as you can imagine, total organizational change, headcount moving from global to countries, putting writing capability in the country and trying to coordinate it with a common brand message, and then building up a whole digital function from scratch. I mean, we really didn't have digital in the countries at all. So this was a huge change for us, putting the customer at the center of everything.
And this is just a fun, does anybody want to guess how many product families we have at Cisco? Just not even individual products, 725 product families, all with product managers that think that their product is the most important thing to the customer. So if you think about the scale of what we're trying to do, you have to put the customer at the center, or you're going to have 725 people talking about their box that plugs into the wall all to the same person. So I know that it's a big problem, and at Cisco it's a huge problem just because we sell so many different things.
Right, to the same people.
To the same people.
To the same people. If we're selling different things to different people, that would be fine.
Yeah.
But it's not. So it's been an interesting dynamic, and we have found that that putting the customer first breaks down product silos once people start to buy in. It makes a huge difference. It's actually helped some teams to transform. So this is our overall framework for how we do this, and it looks pretty simple. When we actually, in practice, it's complicated, and there's a lot of people, and it can be messy. But the idea is we do a lot of detailed research on personas. And we were joking earlier, Jenny said, fake it until you make it. And we, in fact, did not have any personas researched when my department and her department were formed. So we said, let's put the customer at the center, but we're going to have to pretend that the persona is done. So we had to put the structure in place as if there was a persona and we had to start learning. We couldn't wait until the research was done. So what we did is we started researching personas, both qualitatively and quantitatively. So I don't know if people know Adele Ravella. She started and runs the Buyer Persona Institute. She has been invaluable in helping us come up with a framework and a methodology to do blind interviews with customers. So we can find out what they care about in their own language, right? Not what we think they care about or that the person of product family 77 thinks they care about, but what they actually care about in their day-to-day work life. And we did it across multiple countries, ranges of sizes and sizes of companies and industries. And what we were able to do, I think 12 have actually been researched, and we're probably going to go up to about 17, I think, eventually. But out of the ones we've researched, you also often find common themes, right, that the customers have, both within a persona and sometimes between personas. And we'll talk about how that can drive efficiency later. But when we did this research, we then backed it up with quantitative research regarding where customers go for information at a high level. what formats they prefer things on, where do they participate in a buying cycle within a company, within a commit. Usually people who buy our things are in a committee that decides what to buy and who to choose and who to spend money on. It's usually not one person. So there's a whole complex ecosystem of customers. So we did that research, and that's where Jenny's team comes in. They're the second step in the process. So you want to talk about
so
that?
I have a team, and we call them omni-channel managers, and recognizing that omni-channel is still an aspiration for, I think, any B2B organization, but ours specifically. But we're trying to make that thought pervasive throughout everything that we do. And so we have omnichannel strategies, we have omnichannel managers. But really, what we're trying to shift is this dynamic of our digital channels being merely publishing platforms. And so we're looking at them more as engagement platforms for our customers. And so you don't have a single customer that engages with you solely on social media. So the message that someone's getting via LinkedIn should match up with whatever their next step is going to be. So we put a lot of effort into making sure that there's coordination across all of our paid, owned, and earned channels. So we're having a consistent dialogue with our priority personas, regardless of where they're choosing to engage. So we set out, I might get flogged for this. I recognize that I'm at a content conference, but the biggest change for us is that content comes last in the process. And we're a very content-heavy organization. We have people that produce very good things and are very proud, but our muscle memory is to produce a piece of content and then ask, what should we do with it? And so we're really trying to change that. Everything is purpose-built for the customer and for the channel and for the experience that we're trying to drive. So I usually highlight it in red at the end of this, that content is last in the customer-centric process. So what works well, we have a lot of data to support it, but what works well on LinkedIn is not necessarily going to be something that someone's looking for when they come directly to your site. So we look at, what types of derivative content do we need, work closely with Bob's team to help actually ideate and create things for a specific purpose, just versus someone handing this to our team and saying, go put this on the website.
Here's my white paper about product 93.
Let's get it in front of people. And who's your target audience? And they're like, Twitter. And I'm like, no, that's not an audience. So we have to have a lot of those conversations.
Well, actually, my favorite one, right? Because we also work on approving emails that go out to customers and try and do air traffic control, which mixed results. But people will come to us with that and they'll say, who's your target? And they'll always pick, no matter what they sell, they could be selling IP phones, and they want to talk to the network buyer because that's where the most names are in the database, right? They don't care. Well, if 3 respond, they think it's a good thing, except 27 unsubscribe, right? So it's getting to the right people is important, and knowing that audience and the message is key.
Yep.
So then we're going to double click a little bit down on originating content. So do you want to talk about the journeys, or we'll get to that later? Or?
We can talk about that later.
Okay. So taking the movie theme maybe one step too far. So in this
Bob style, just a little bit
too much, a little bit more than you need to know. But one of the things that we decided to do is, in this project we're going to tell you about later, was we said, let's look at how we can actually take what we have and maybe produce it more efficiently by now, so we plan by persona, we figure out what we're going to say by persona, we think of the core messages, and then we align the value we bring to it across everything we sell. And I'll show you an example later. But when we do that, then we say, but then to efficiently produce something, we might have to look at the commonalities between personas and talk about a topic once, but personalize it for each persona. And I'll show you what that looks like graphically. So we look at our core messaging in this context. Then we typically do an audit of what we have across everything. We've all gotten very good at doing audits. We do audits all the time whenever we start a major campaign or project. And then what we do is we take the existing content that we think fits the message and we pull it apart into pieces. We typically take bigger pieces or things that are maybe moderate size format. We try and break it up into component parts so that we can then tag it and reuse it. And we can reconstruct it for personas and tailor it for personas. We adapt it to how the customer needs to see it based on our research. So again, we have the framework that we have from the persona research. We have the detailed channels that we have from Jenny's team, so we know the message and the format and the channel. So that's when we start creating, and that's why it's last, because you need to know all 3 of those things to really be effective across all the channels. One thing I'm afraid about is that I call this Borg cube, for those of you who know Star Trek. This is the cube of infinite content. We have to be really, really, really careful, because the way we started to do this pilot that we're going to describe is I'm envisioning in my head, I have to write about this 27 times, one for each persona, times the amount of content. So we're trying to stay away from the cube of infinite content. And the way we're doing that might, with all the talk about AI, might seem a little bit old-fashioned, but we'll show you what we're doing conceptually. So, actually, this is Jenny's long run here. So she's got the power.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about planning the experience. And so I told you we have a team of omnichannel marketers that think about the holistic customer experience. And so the way that we kind of break this down, we have really complicated slides that show how we actually plan an omnichannel approach. This is a simplified version of it. So it's really understanding who we're targeting, understanding where they go for information, because that's where we need to be, is where the customer is. Really understanding what we're going to speak to them about once we find them in that channel and making sure that that's a really, truly customer-centric message. And then this is the hardest part, I think, for a lot of marketers, is once you've spoken to them once, how are you going to continue to re-engage? And we have, our VP calls it 51st dates, is what it's like to engage with Cisco, is that every time you come to Cisco.com, we treat you as the same person.
Welcome.
And, welcome. Hi, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Even though you've been a loyal customer for 37 years. And the nurture strategy. Lots of heads go to email for nurture, but that includes our retargeting. It includes how we engage our sales teams and pass them insights. So when someone eventually does end up with a channel partner or with a reseller, we can feed all of that engagement activity to them. So the sales rep knows how to pick the conversation up where the customer left off. So these are kind of the 4 tenets that we break it into, is, really thinking through holistically. Don't take the first touch for granted. We need to continue that dialogue and recognize, based off of their behavior, what that next best action is for the customer. So we have some really awesome flowcharts that we'll share with you guys in a little bit to kind of highlight how we structure those.
You know what I was going to say, though? So many people have talked about context, right? I think Robert talked about it. I think Cruz, who's in the back, spoke about context a little bit. But understanding where the customer's coming from and what they've done in the past is just as important as where they've landed at the moment. Right, understanding that context in terms of what we give them next is really, really important. Yep.
And we'll talk a little bit about that too. So one of the questions that we always have with Bob's team is, we sit down and, we're trying to drive personalized experiences. We want someone in the financial services industry to have a financial services specific experience on Cisco.com, for instance. And where our team comes in is really understanding what are the business rules, what are the platforms that we can use to understand and recognize that someone's in the financial services industry, and then how do we match that up with serving them the right piece of content. So that's kind of what we're going to go into here. We look at personalization across, and dynamic personalization as much as possible across a lot of different channels. So we're experimenting in email. We have direct partnerships like with TechTarget and IDG, who's, kind of a publication that has a lot of our core audience there. So we're exploring what we can do to do account-based marketing on those platforms. So we have a lot of stuff that's going on, and we're trying to bring this together in an omnichannel approach. Where we're going to focus on today is really Cisco.com, because that's our most valuable property. Cisco.com gets about 14 million unique visitors per month. And those span, industries, verticals, current customers, prospective customers, competitors, et cetera. So Cisco.com is where we really have the opportunity to nail it. It's our own watering hole. We're not having to buy this engagement. So we're putting a lot of emphasis on building out the technology structure to enable us to drive more one-to-one and sometimes one-to-many personalization on our own platform. But what I will tell you is right now, 95% of our customers that come to our website get an identical experience. So whether they've purchased from us in the past, whether they own X number of products within our portfolio and not others, everybody gets the same thing. And that's what we're seeking to change through a lot of what we're doing, focusing on dynamic content and on-domain personalization. I will add you the very first pilot that we ran with personalization on Cisco.com was the homepage. And we looked at the education audience, which is a priority audience for us, and we said, okay, let's serve a different version of the homepage to the education audience. And we even split it, so K through 12 had a different version than higher education. And based off of the volume of traffic that we got from the education audience, we would have had to have run that pilot for 7 years to get any statistical significance as to whether or not this made a difference.
So I think there's an important point to that.
Very important point to that is that we have to make sure that personalization for the sake of personalization is just extra work for everyone. And so what we have to really dig in and understand is where are we actually going to get that value and where's the customer going to get the value, and make sure that those two things intersect. So,
the other thing we were talking about when we were going through this, though, is the country pages, right? I think are you going to mention that here, right here?
Yeah,
okay.
that's what the world is, the countries.
Okay.
No, so, and so at the most basic level, we're looking at geo-targeting, geo-personalization. So in addition to our global Cisco.com website, we have 84 country websites that are local language, local offers, local marketing teams run them. And so at the very least, if we recognize that you're coming in from Japan, we can at least give you the option to go to that site in Japanese to see more relevant context to you. So that's kind of at the larger scale, and it's not thinking of everything as one-to-one. We don't have to recognize that you're in Japan, you're a CIO in the manufacturing industry. Like, ideally, we'll get there, but at the very least, let's recognize where a person's coming in and give them an experience that's most relevant based off of the context of their geography.
So not really personalized per se, but at least local culture oriented.
Yep, exactly. And so my senior director talks a lot about this concept of red carpet experiences. And so we recognize with, just where we're at today, not every customer is going to be able to have a red carpet experience with Cisco. But we have to understand who those are and then prioritize them in terms of content creation. So making sure that we have all the variations to deliver that red carpet experience. So kind of at the bare minimum, you can at least geo-target people and at least give them a more country relevant experience. Then you can kind of move into the spectrum and look at, do we understand based off of past behavior or based off of, a target audience that we've built in our DMP or based off of industry? How can you get a little bit more personalized based off of some of these things that we can understand about an anonymous visitor? And then once you start moving into registered users, fun fact, we have like 3% of our Cisco.com traffic is actually a registered user. So 97% of our traffic is anonymous. So when we do have registered users, that gives you the opportunity to do more point product specific cross-sell, upsell, let them know that their services contract is, coming up for renewal, and do more of that one-to-one. But really what we're trying to solve for, and especially at scale, is that 97% that's anonymous. So how can we recognize their interest and their industry and the data points that we want to personalize off of, and then serve them an experience that matches?
The other thing on this that comes to mind is the use of the personas. So a lot of people think you do a persona, you research it, and then you're done, you're good to go. The personas are really the starting point. It's what we use to create the content, but then we start grouping users. We're hoping to get to the point to where we can start grouping users based on what they're doing. So it's almost, you start with the persona and that's the message, but then you start targeting people with messages based on people who are exhibiting the same behavior, whether or not they have a certain title. But if they're behaving the same, then target them a certain way with certain messages.
And a good example of that is, we network buyer, and Bob's going to go into the persona of a network buyer here in a little bit, is that if we think about a persona, like you almost create different silos by going to this customer-centric approach. So now we have a network buyer, and we know that our network buyer is like, they buy routers, switches, and access points. That's what a network buyer buys. Network buyer could never be interested in a phone system because they're a network buyer. And so we try and keep them in, we've created these persona silos that we keep trying to shove our customers back into. And what we're really trying to do is let behavior be the main driver. So the persona helps you shape the message and really get in the customer's shoes. But what the customer is actually doing at that moment, they could have a network buyer title, but be behaving as a data center manager or as someone that's researching a phone system. And so we have to have dynamic capabilities to be able to interpret that behavior and then respond to it in real time with the right content.